On a freezing afternoon, a young woman handed her only meal to a stranger on the street, without imagining that this act of kindness would echo back into her life in the most unexpected way. Sometimes, the smallest gestures open the biggest doors, but only fate knows when and how. It was one of those bitterly cold mornings in Chicago, the kind that cuts through layers of clothes and seeps into your bones. Ellie had just finished her shift at the local diner where she worked cleaning tables and occasionally helping in the kitchen. Her coat, thrifted and several winters old, barely kept her warm as she walked toward the small bus stop near 14th Street. In her hand, wrapped in a thin plastic bag, was the only thing she looked forward to every day. Her leftover lunch, a modest turkey sandwich and a small apple. She hadn't eaten since dawn. The smells from the kitchen, though familiar, only reminded her of the ache in her belly. The walk home was long and the bus came late, as always. But Ellie was used to waiting. For the bus, for payday, for life to get a little easier. As she sat on the bench, shivering, she noticed a man sitting a few feet away. His coat was torn, shoes wrapped in plastic, and his beard thick with days of cold. He looked like he hadn't eaten in longer than she had. Their eyes met for a brief moment before he looked down again, ashamed, it seemed, of being seen. Something in Ellie's heart stirred. She glanced at her lunch, then at him. Her stomach protested, but her soul knew what to do. Without a word, she got up, walked toward him, and handed him the bag. "Here," she said softly. "You need it more than I do." The man hesitated, eyes wide with disbelief. "Are you sure?" he asked in a cracked voice. She nodded. "Yes, it's not much, but it's something." He took it with trembling hands. "God bless you," he murmured, tears welling up in his eyes. Ellie smiled weakly and returned to the bench. Her stomach growled again, but something inside her felt full. Not in the way food fills you, but in the way doing the right thing can. The bus finally arrived. She got on, not knowing that this moment, a simple act of kindness, had just set her life on a path she could never have imagined. Days turned into weeks, and that cold afternoon became just another memory in Ellie's long collection of quiet struggles. Life didn't pause to reward her for being kind. Instead, it pushed forward, relentless and indifferent. She returned to her routine. Long hours at the diner, taking care of her ailing mother and counting every dollar twice before spending it. The winter deepened. Her boots began to leak from the soles, and every cough from her mother brought with it a new wave of anxiety. She didn't regret giving away her lunch, not for a second, but sometimes late at night, she wondered if anyone ever really noticed the good people tried to do. Ellie had grown used to being invisible. At work, customers barely looked her in the eye. On the bus, people avoided the seat next to her, as if poverty had a smell they feared catching. Even her few friends had slowly drifted away, too busy with their own lives to notice her silence. But still, she endured. She held onto her dignity like a threadbare blanket, too worn to protect her, but too precious to let go. She never told anyone about the man she fed, not her mother, not her co-workers. It wasn't something she shared for praise. It was just something that felt right, as natural as breathing. Ellie believed in doing good, even if the world didn't clap for it. Meanwhile, somewhere across the city, that same man, the one with the torn coat and tired eyes, hadn't forgotten her. His name was Charles. And what Ellie didn't know was that he wasn't homeless at all. Not really. What she had witnessed was a moment, a disguise, a layer of truth wrapped in circumstance. And that turkey sandwich, it had become a symbol, a story he kept replaying in his mind over and over. While Ellie returned to her daily grind, Charles began searching for her. Quietly, carefully, not because he pitied her, but because something in her eyes had moved him, something pure, rare, and nearly impossible to find in the world he had built for himself. She had seen him at his worst and treated him with compassion. Now, he wondered, would she treat him the same if she knew who he really was? But Ellie, unaware of the quiet storm brewing in her destiny, kept her head down and her heart steady. The world hadn't changed, not that she could see. She had given her food to a stranger, and life had simply gone on. Or so she thought. Ellie's life was a quiet war. Every day was a new battle, and every night, a reminder of how close she lived to the edge. She worked 6 days a week at the diner, scrubbing greasy floors and washing dishes until her fingers ached. Tips were rare, and when they came, she tucked them carefully into a chipped glass jar hidden behind the couch at home, her emergency fund, though it barely added up to anything. Home was a one-bedroom apartment in a crumbling building that smelled of mildew and loneliness. She shared the bed with her mother, Caroline, whose health had been fading since the stroke last spring. Caroline could no longer work, and the medication costs were suffocating. Medicaid helped, but not nearly enough. Most nights, Ellie would come home exhausted, change her mother's sheets, heat up soup, if there was any, and sit beside her until she fell asleep. She never complained, but the dark circles under her eyes and the way her clothes hung looser each week spoke louder than words. Despite it all, Ellie clung to her dreams. She wanted to study nursing. She wanted to help others the way she wished someone would help her mother. But that dream felt like it belonged to another lifetime, one where she wasn't broke, where bills didn't come in red envelopes, and where there was space to breathe. The few moments of joy she had came from books. She'd found a small stack of used romance novels in a donation box near the church and would read them slowly, savoring each page as if it were a piece of chocolate. In those stories, women like her were seen, loved, rescued, but real life didn't have grand gestures or knights in shining armor. In real life, Ellie walked through snow in cracked shoes and prayed the power wouldn't be cut off again. And yet she remained kind. She still greeted strangers with a smile. She still gave directions to lost tourists, held the elevator for grumpy neighbors, and listened when lonely customers at the diner needed someone to talk to. It was this kindness, small, steady, unshakable, that made her different. And while she had no idea that someone was searching for her, fate was already preparing their next meeting, because the man who once sat on the curb eating her sandwich, he was about to walk back into her life, not as a stranger this time, but as the gatekeeper to everything she'd ever dreamed of. It had been 3 months since that freezing afternoon. Ellie had almost forgotten the man on the sidewalk, not because the moment lacked meaning, but because survival demanded that she keep moving. She had no space for wondering what happened to him. There were bills to pay, pills to buy, hours to work. But that morning was different. She saw the flyer at the diner's back bulletin board. Administrative assistant needed, full-time, competitive pay, no college degree required. The address was in the upscale part of town, the kind of place where glass buildings scraped the sky and people wore coats that cost more than her monthly rent. Ellie hesitated. She didn't have the right clothes. Her resume was a joke. But something deep inside, maybe the same voice that told her to give away her lunch that day, urged her to try. She borrowed a blouse from her neighbor, ironed her slacks twice, and braided her hair to hide the frizz. That morning, she left earlier than usual, her stomach tight with nerves and hope. The building was tall, intimidating. Inside, everything gleamed. Marble floors, silver elevators, fresh flowers in crystal vases. She felt wildly out of place. The receptionist smiled politely and handed her a clipboard. "You're here for the interview with Mr. Barrett." "Yes," Ellie replied, hands trembling as she wrote her name. She waited 15 minutes before being called. The hallway that led to the office was long and silent, her footsteps echoing too loudly. When she entered the room, her breath caught. Sitting behind the large oak desk was a man in a navy suit, hair neatly styled, eyes sharp, and heartbreakingly familiar. He looked up from her resume. Their eyes met, and for a second, time stood still. Ellie's heart skipped. Something about him stirred a memory, a distant moment under a grey sky, a pair of hungry eyes, a whisper of gratitude. But she didn't dare ask. That would be crazy, wouldn't it? "Miss Ellis, is it?" he said, his voice smoother now, confident, composed. "Yes, sir," she answered, unsure whether to sit or stand. Charles Barrett watched her closely, expression unreadable. Inside, however, his chest was tight. There she was, the girl who had shared her only meal with him without hesitation. She hadn't recognized him, not yet, and he wasn't ready to tell her, not yet. Charles Barrett leaned back in his chair, studying Ellie as if she were a riddle he hadn't quite solved. He had seen 1,000 resumes and interviewed 100 candidates that year, but none had struck him the way she had, because none of them had fed him when he was invisible. But he couldn't just hand her the job. Not yet. He needed to know if what he saw in her that day on the street was real, or just a fleeting act of charity. So he smiled politely and began the interview. "Tell me, Miss Ellis, why should I hire you? What do you have that others don't?" Ellie swallowed hard. Her palms were sweaty. "Honestly, sir, I don't have a fancy degree or years of office experience, but I work hard. I'm never late, I follow instructions, and I treat everyone with respect." He nodded slowly. "We'll see." The next week, he called her back, not to offer the job, but to start a probationary trial as a temporary assistant. 3 weeks, no guarantees. Ellie accepted without hesitation. It was more than she'd ever been offered. From day one, the work was grueling. Filing, sorting, fetching coffee, managing schedules. The team was fast-paced and sharp. She felt out of place, like a patch of denim in a silk showroom. But she never complained. Charles, meanwhile, watched everything. He noticed how she stayed late without being asked, how she apologized when she made mistakes, how she offered to help the cleaning crew when they struggled with heavy bins. She treated the janitor the same way she treated the CFO, but he didn't make things easy. In meetings, he tested her memory. In emails, he challenged her phrasing. One afternoon, he even pretended to lose an important file just to see how she'd react under pressure. And she never snapped, never lashed out. She just worked harder. Behind closed doors, his team didn't understand. "Why her?" his assistant Lauren asked. "She's not qualified." But Charles only said, "There's more to success than experience." At night, Ellie would return home drained, but she refused to give up. She didn't know why Mr. Barrett was pushing her so hard. She only knew this opportunity could change everything, and she wouldn't waste it. What she didn't realize was that this was never just an interview. It was a test of heart, and she was passing. But still, Charles kept his secret. Because once she found out who he really was, he wasn't sure she'd forgive him. From the moment Ellie stepped into that pristine office building, some people had already decided she didn't belong. The whispers started softly, behind coffee cups, behind closed doors. But whispers, like smoke, always find a way to rise. She's just a temp. Why is Mr. Barrett paying so much attention to her? Did you see the way he looks at her? Weird, right? Probably some charity case. She'll be gone in a month. Ellie heard bits and pieces, laughter that stopped when she walked in, comments that stung even when unsaid. She'd always known how it felt to be underestimated. But now, in this world of designer shoes and degrees from Ivy League schools, the stares cut deeper. Still, she kept her head down. Her work spoke louder than their rumors, until the day her lunch mysteriously disappeared from the break room fridge. Then it was files going missing from her desk. An email draft sent before she had finished writing it, to the entire department. Small sabotages that added up. She began to doubt herself. Was she really not cut out for this? Were they right? But one morning, Charles called her into his office. His voice was calm, but there was steel in his eyes. Ellie, I know what's happening. I'm watching everything. Her breath caught. I would never. I know, he interrupted gently. And you're doing better than most. She nodded slowly, unsure what else to say. He leaned forward. You don't need to prove anything to anyone here but yourself. Just keep showing me who you are. His words felt like a blanket in winter. She didn't fully understand why he cared, why he believed in her. But those few sentences gave her just enough strength to walk back out and face the storm again. But Lauren, his assistant, noticed the exchange. And she didn't like it. That week, Lauren set her sights on Ellie. She began double-checking her work, publicly questioning her in meetings, even suggesting to Charles that Ellie wasn't mentally prepared for this environment. Charles didn't respond, but his silence wasn't approval. It was calculation. He was testing not just Ellie, but everyone else too. And Ellie, she endured, because what she didn't know, what no one knew, was that Charles was nearing the moment when he would reveal the truth that would shake every assumption in that office and change her life forever. It happened on a Thursday. The office was unusually quiet that morning. The usual hum of printers, the clatter of keyboards, all softened as if the building itself was holding its breath. Ellie was organizing folders when she heard the crash. A loud bang, then gasps. She rushed toward the commotion and found Charles on the ground, leaning against the wall, pale and breathing heavily. His hand clutched his chest, his eyes squeezed shut. "Call 911!" someone shouted, but Ellie was already on her knees beside him. "Mr. Barrett!" she cried, her voice shaking. "Stay with me! Breathe! I'm here!" He looked at her, and in that moment his guard fell. There was no suit, no title, no power in his eyes. Just vulnerability. Later at the hospital, the doctor explained it wasn't a heart attack, but a panic episode. Intense, but manageable. Still, he needed rest. Real rest. Charles refused to see anyone from work, except Ellie. When she stepped into his room, he sat up slowly, looking tired but calm. He motioned for her to sit beside him. "I owe you an explanation," he said softly. Ellie's brows furrowed. "For what?" He smiled faintly. "For everything." And then he told her how he had disguised himself that day, part of a silent campaign he was funding to better understand homelessness in the city, how he had been mistaken for one of the people he was trying to help, how no one looked him in the eye, except her. Ellie's lips parted in shock. You were the man?" she whispered. He nodded. "And you gave me your only meal." Silence filled the room, thick with emotion. "I never forgot your face," he said. "You didn't see a man with dirty clothes. You saw a human being, and that meant more to me than you'll ever know." Ellie stared at him, speechless. Her heart raced, not with fear, but disbelief. "All this time," she murmured. Charles nodded again. "I didn't tell you sooner because I needed to know who you really were. If that kindness was a moment, or a part of you." "And?" she asked, her voice barely audible. His answer was simple. "It's who you are." Tears welled in her eyes, a mix of gratitude, shock, and something else, something deeper. She wasn't sure what this all meant yet, but for the first time in her life, she felt truly seen. And in that sterile hospital room, something unspoken passed between them, a truth far greater than the one he had just confessed. After that day in the hospital, nothing between Ellie and Charles felt quite the same. He returned to the office a week later, but the air between them had changed. There was a softness in his gaze when he looked at her, a hesitation in his voice when he called her name. He no longer tested her, no longer played the role of distant CEO. Instead, he offered advice, listened more than he spoke, and smiled at her in ways that made her stomach flutter. Ellie tried to keep her feet on the ground. She reminded herself over and over that this was still her boss, that she had a job to do, that she couldn't confuse kindness for affection. But her heart didn't listen. One evening, as the office emptied and the city lights flickered outside, Charles appeared at her desk. "Are you free for dinner?" he asked, his tone careful. She looked up, startled. As in, I'd like to thank you, properly, not as your employer, just as me." That night they sat in a quiet restaurant. Not the kind with white tablecloths and wine lists, but a small Italian place with flickering candles and the smell of garlic in the air. Ellie was nervous at first, but Charles made her laugh. He asked about her dreams, her childhood, her favorite book. He didn't talk about work at all. And when the check came, he didn't offer a speech. He just said, "I haven't felt this comfortable with anyone in a long time." Ellie smiled, her cheeks warm. "Me neither." As they walked outside, the cold wind wrapped around them. Charles hesitated. "Can I walk you home?" She hesitated too, then nodded. They didn't hold hands. They didn't talk much. But the silence between them was full, rich, honest. At her doorstep, he paused. "Ellie, I know this is unexpected, and I don't want to make things difficult for you at work. But I've been thinking about you a lot." She looked at him, heart pounding. "I don't want you to feel obligated. I just needed you to know. I care." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then softly, "I care too." They didn't kiss. Not that night. But something had begun. Something neither of them could ignore. It wasn't about power. It wasn't about charity. It was about two souls who had met in the middle of a cold street and found warmth in each other. The weeks that followed felt like a dream. But dreams, Ellie knew, could be fragile things. Charles became a constant presence in her life. He never rushed her, never crossed lines, but his affection was clear. Dinners turned into walks. Conversations became deeper, and laughter came easier. For the first time in her life, Ellie began to imagine a future that wasn't built on survival, but on possibility. Then came the offer. Not romantic, professional. Charles had called her into his office and handed her a folder. "I want to sponsor your nursing degree," he said, his voice calm but serious. "Full tuition, housing, books, everything. You'd leave the company and focus on school. No strings attached." Ellie stared at the papers inside. It was real. A full scholarship. A second chance. "But why?" she asked, barely able to speak. "Because you deserve more than this desk," he replied. "You've spent your life giving. It's time someone gave back." She felt the tears coming but blinked them away. The offer was everything she'd dreamed of. But it also meant leaving behind what they were building. The late-night talks, the stolen glances, the quiet connection that had grown between them. "What about us?" she asked. Charles smiled softly. "I'll still be here. This offer isn't about me. It's about you, your life, your future." But Ellie knew things would change. Distance has a way of unraveling delicate beginnings, and deep down she feared that once she left, their story might quietly fade. She went home that night and sat beside her mother, who was stronger now, thanks to better care Charles had secretly arranged. They talked, and for the first time, Ellie opened her heart. "I think he really cares for me," she said. Her mother smiled. "Then if it's real, it will survive distance. But what if I'm walking away from something rare? Or walking toward the woman you're meant to be?" The choice haunted Ellie for days. She could stay, keep working beside Charles, and maybe fall in love. Or she could leave, risk everything, and become the nurse she always dreamed of being. In the end, she chose. And when she walked into Charles's office, eyes shining with equal parts fear and hope, she simply said, yes, not just to the scholarship, but to herself. 1 year later, the city was still the same traffic, the same towering buildings, the same cold wind sweeping through the streets. But Ellie wasn't the same. She now wore a white coat instead of an apron. Her days were filled with classes, clinical hours, and textbooks she once thought were beyond her reach. It hadn't been easy. There were nights she cried from exhaustion, days she questioned her strength. But through it all, she kept going, fueled by something deeper than ambition: hope. Charles kept his word. He didn't interfere, didn't try to sway her, but he sent letters, real handwritten letters, one every week. Sometimes short, sometimes poetic. He told her about books he was reading, moments he missed her, things he admired about her, and always ended with, "No matter how far, I'm right here." She kept every single one in a box under her bed. One chilly spring afternoon, just after completing her final clinical rotation, Ellie received a small envelope. Inside, a single note: "Meet me where you first saw me, 14th Street bench, tomorrow, noon." Her heart raced. The next day, she wore her coat and scarf just like that first freezing afternoon. When she turned the corner, she saw him. Charles was seated on the same bench. No suit, no briefcase. Just a man, waiting. When their eyes met, he stood. Neither of them spoke at first. They didn't need to. Ellie walked up, tears blurring her vision, and whispered, "I've missed you." "I've missed you too," he said, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small brown paper sack. Inside, a sandwich and a green apple. His eyes widened. "Thought maybe we could share lunch this time," she said with a trembling smile. Charles laughed, a full, joyful sound, and nodded. They sat together on that cold bench side by side, sharing the simplest meal. It wasn't about wealth or rescue anymore. It was about two people who had met through kindness and found everything they never knew they needed. Full circle. Sometimes, life gives back when you least expect it. Would you share your last meal with a stranger if you knew it could change everything? This story reminds us that kindness isn't just about giving. It's about planting seeds that bloom in ways we may never see until the day they come back to us, full circle. What would you have done if you were Ellie? Leave your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one. Have you ever received help when you least expected it? Share your story. Someone might need to hear it today. And hey, if this story touched your heart, consider leaving a super thanks. Your financial support helps us bring more stories like this to life. Stories that heal, inspire, and connect. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notifications so you never miss another emotional story like this. And now click the video on your screen to watch another unforgettable love story. You won't regret it.